It's Eli, and a lot has happened in the last few days. A lot has changed. Things moved pretty quickly after I told Tristan the story of my family's deaths. My emotions have kind of been all over the place, and for good reason. It's been crazy. Let me back up to where I left off last time, and then we can build up to the crazy parts. What do you say? Great. Glad you agree. So, I told Tristan everything, and I'm proud to say that though I got a bit choked up, I did not have a nervous breakdown. I think you may have taken great delight in it if I did, so thank God I could keep my shit together. When I finished, there was silence for a long moment. He simply stared at me, thinking, considering, I don't know. Just as I finally opened my mouth to say something, Tristan suddenly said, "It's at a bank." Now I stared at him. Had he really just given me a helpful piece of information? It's at a bank a few streets away from here. Big gaudy place. There was a massive hole in the roof. I don't remember the name, but I would recognize it anywhere. I know how to get there, too. The gears in my head were turning rapidly as I put it together. If what he said was true, I was pretty sure I didn't need Tristan to lead us there. In fact, I was pretty sure I had been there before. It sounded a hell of a lot like the bank where I'd first met Waffles, after all. "Holy shit," I said. "I know what bank you're talking about." He gave me the death glare, TM, although it didn't bother me as much now that he'd actually helped me somewhat. Who cared now if he was being a little bitch? I'd already won. "Well, if you're so smart, I guess you don't need me anymore." Looks like it was time to be the bigger man here. Not that it meant that I couldn't take a little pleasure in throwing some of his assholery back at him. I shrugged. I mean, not really, but it would be nice if you came with us. You know, since you're so great at killing monsters. He squinted at me. I swear he was trying to tell if I was being sincere. Good. I hadn't felt like I had the upper hand once since he'd been here. Until now. "Fine. I'll come," he finally said. "But only because I want to make sure you don't screw it up. And to look for Nolan." "Obviously," I said, trying to hide my smile. So that's how we ended up planning our escape attempt with Tristan as our unexpected and largely unwanted third wheel. If you're wondering, Zoe leapt up wielding her axe as soon as we opened the door, and death glared Tristan the entire time I told her about our conversation, until she was absolutely certain he hadn't tried anything or hurt me. Then when I got to the elevator part, she acted cool and sent Tristan downstairs, saying we had to talk alone. And once he was out of sight, the cool facade faded. She shrieked and hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. And we both cried together, but in a happy way. Because we might finally be getting out of here. We spent the next few days after that packing and preparing, although there wasn't that much preparing to do because, 1, we already had the weapons we'd use, and 2, we didn't want to raise suspicion of our intentions by looking like we were preparing for something big. Besides, at this point, we just wanted to go for it, and we figured the less time we waited, the better. There was less of a chance that people watching us would realize we knew where the elevator was if we acted fast. We actually debated going at night, despite the fact that being out at night is generally always a bad idea, but we thought that the cover of darkness might help us be less noticed. That is, until Zoe pointed out that there's no way the cameras they use don't have night vision. And assuming that's true, going at night wouldn't make us any more discreet. All it would do is make us more susceptible to being brutally killed. So we planned for late morning. The night before, hopefully the last night we ever spent in the dome, Zoe and I laid together on the mattress, Mr. Bailey purring at our feet. Her head was on my chest like usual, and she looked up at me, her eyes shining by the light of the bedside lamp sitting on the floor beside us. "You really think we're gonna get out of here tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "I hope so," I said. "It feels weird to think about being somewhere besides here. There were so many nights when I couldn't sleep because all I could think about was dying in this dome. But now there's a real chance we might be out of here, in the real world, tomorrow. It seems like it took so long, but also came so fast." It took a few minutes before she replied. "I know what you mean," she said. "It's been a year, but this is the realest it's seemed so far." Now I hesitated. I still hadn't told her how I felt. I was pretty sure she felt the same. It certainly looked promising. But if we got out of here, would she still feel like that? What if it was a lack of other options situation? Because she sure as hell could do better than me. Zoe is the most awesome girl I've ever met. But how did I ask that? I searched for the words. "Zoe, the best part of being stuck here has been with you. And I don't want that to end, wherever we are. Killing monsters with you is great and all, but I wouldn't mind, going to a movie or to a restaurant, doing normal things, with you." I trailed off awkwardly. She sat up, leaning on her elbows so that her hair hung down on the pillow and tickled my ear. Her face was surprisingly close to mine, and my heart beat faster. "Are you saying you want to date me?" she asked with a little smile. My cheeks burned. I was glad she'd already taken her glasses off for the night, because hopefully she couldn't see me blushing quite as well. Yes, I said. "I am saying that." She grinned, leaned over to kiss me on the cheek, and then laid back down, settling her head back onto my chest. "I'd go to a movie with you," she said, "especially a musical. By the way, you're cute when you blush." Fuck, she had seen. I blushed harder and said nothing as I turned off the light. The next morning was a whirlwind of excitement and nerves. Finally armed with weapons, our pack bags, and my rules, I have shared all 12 of them now after all, we headed for the bank. And yes, we still only had 2 bulletproof vests, and Zoe and I took those. I may not be as much of a dick as Tristan, but I'm not a good enough person to willingly give such a dick my bulletproof vest. Sorry, buddy. We gave you weapons. That's the best you're getting. We were quite a team by this point. Me, Zoe, Tristan, Waffles, Mr. Bailey. No, we still didn't know what Tristan's deal was. He could be planning to betray us. But we figured it was better to have him with us where we could keep an eye on him than leave him behind to give him the opportunity to orchestrate something. And we certainly weren't about to leave Waffles or Mr. Bailey to watch him. Like hell we'd try to escape without either of them. I'd die before leaving Mr. Bailey behind in this hellhole. Plus, maybe Tristan was begrudgingly on our side. I hate to be anticlimactic here, but as for the part of the journey from the bookstore to the bank, our strategy was just to fucking book it and hope for the best. I'm not kidding. We jogged most of the way. Sprinting was impossible and wearing bulletproof vests and loaded down with all of our stuff. It mostly worked. We made it to the bank with a few encounters, but between Zoe's axe, my pistols, and Waffles being himself, none were too serious. Seems this new strategy was a lot more successful than our Home Depot plan and execution. We made it to the bank and let Waffles kill the few Calebs hanging around as we walked to the side of the building. The front door was deadbolted after all, and though Waffles could probably break it down, the noise would alert all the Brents nearby to our presence. You may remember that I was being chased by such a herd last time I was at this bank, so I wasn't particularly eager to repeat that experience. "Where'd you see it exactly?" I whispered to Tristan. He rolled his eyes but stepped up in front of us, to one of the large windows looking in on the bank's marble lobby. Zoe and I joined him on either side, peering in through the glass. "There," he said, pointing towards the back of the bank to what appeared to be the large metal door to a walk-in safe. "Looks like a safe," I said. Tristan rolled his eyes even more aggressively than the first time, which is saying something. "Duh, it looks like a safe. That's probably the point. But it's not a safe. It's the elevator." We all stared at it for several minutes. Nothing happened. It was hard to say whether that was good or bad. I mean, it made sense that it was being used less now to send monsters up, since there were plenty of monsters in the city already. But was it just being used less, or were they aware we were here, or in trying to lure us into a false sense of security? Well, ultimately it didn't matter, because we had to go for it. If we turned back now, they'd have seen us today and would know that we had found the elevator. And let's face it, we'd be fucked. Because if they knew that we knew about the elevator, they'd never let us make it back to this bank again. Hell, maybe they'd even kill us all in our sleep tonight. Nope, it was now or never. I reached up to pet Mr. Bailey, hoping it would calm my pounding heart a bit. He purred. "Alright, guess it's time," I said. "Tristan, any last info you want to share with us?" I got another death glare, TM, for that question. "No," he said. "Great," I said cheerily. "Let's do this thing." Zoe smiled at me, raised her axe above her head, and swung it full force into the window. The glass shattered inwards, spraying shards across the marble floor. She swung again, clearing the remaining glass, and gestured for me to go through. So I did. Carefully, I raised myself up onto the ledge. The bottom of the window was at waist height, and climbed into the bank. Tristan followed, and then Zoe. Our footsteps echoed on the marble as we landed. It was a classy interior, and under different circumstances I would have been impressed. Lots of marble, columns, a chandelier that was somehow still hanging despite the gaping hole beside it and the high ceiling. "Seems okay," I whispered. Cautiously, we took a few steps forward. Nothing happened. Another few steps. Still nothing, except the sound of our feet on the marble and the occasional glass cracking as we crunched the shards beneath our shoes. We were about in the middle of the bank when that changed. Zoe said, "Eli, go unlock the doors and let Waffles in. Tristan and I will start towards the elevator." And as soon as the words left her lips, a loud mechanical whirring noise started, followed by a sort of grinding. We all looked at each other in fear. I think I saw real emotion in Tristan's eyes for the first time, as the noises continued. Only seconds later, the safe's door began to move. But instead of swinging outwards like it should, the entire metal door began to slide sideways, disappearing into the wall. Yes, exactly like an elevator. And what was behind the door? Well, as it continued to slide, the entire space behind it was revealed to house more and more monsters. With growing horror, I realized that I saw every type of monster in my rules. I've never faced more than a few types at once before. This was uncharted territory. I had a few new theories and a few tricks up my sleeve, but I wouldn't know if it was enough until A, they worked, or B, I tried them and died. Can't wait. And then the door was open, and they began to charge. The mechanical whirring was replaced with a cacophony of roars, screeches, and singing. "Fuck!" I yelled as my head burst into pain. "Earplugs!" We'd had those ready around our necks, of course, so it was a quick process to double layer on the earplugs and noise-canceling headphones over top. At least Sandra's were dealt with, rule number 8. Unfortunately, that still left quite a few varieties. Zoe gestured for me to go let Waffles in, and though my heart lurched at the thought of leaving her to fend for herself, because, let's be honest, I didn't count Tristan as help, she was right. We stood a much better chance with Waffles. I turned my back to the monster hordes and took off running for the doors, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the voice recorder as I went. I clicked play and threw it off to the side, watching it come to a rest next to a column and trusting that it would hold off Dylan's. Rule number 9. Zoe had been carrying one too, so that should be enough. I reached the doors, which were both locked and barred shut. This level of security, which had mystified me so much last time I was here, now made a bit more sense. Cursing under my breath, I struggled with the lock. It was rusted enough that it was sticking shut. I braced my legs against the door and pulled as hard as I could. The lock finally slid open, causing me to slip and crash onto my back. Upside down, I looked back at monsters, my forehead resting on the cool marble. I saw a few Dylans covering their ears and looking pissed, so they were all dealt with, thank God. Zoe and Tristan seemed to be holding their own. They were attacking and throwing our homemade bombs like champions, sending up great bursts of flame. I couldn't hear the shrieks, but I was sure the monsters were screaming. And then, still looking upside down, I realized that several Brents had gotten past the others and were running towards me. Shit, shit, shit! I yelled, scrambling back to my feet and frantically ripping the bar away. I was just in time. Right as the Brents bore down on me and I flinched away, the doors burst open, and Waffles was there. Mark that down as the second time he's directly saved my life. Roaring, he launched himself at his brethren and fucking annihilated 2 of them in one go. I pulled out one of the Molotov cocktails in my pocket and threw it at one of the others, watching as it went up in fire. Rule number 4. I was pretty sure Waffles smiled at me, though it was kind of hard to tell if it was a smile or a grimace with all those fangs in the way. Now that those few fuckers were taken care of, I gestured for him to follow me, and together we raced forward to join Zoe and Tristan. We were making progress. Not perfect, but progress nonetheless. Heat exploded in our faces as we depleted the arsenal of cocktails and bombs we brought. Between this and Waffles, the Brents were handled. Some of the Calebs too, though we ran out of explosives before we'd killed all of them. Which meant it was time for this secret weapon. I threw one of my knives at an oncoming MJ. It looked like Caleb, just to fuck with me probably, so watching the knife land in its face was super satisfying. Fuck Caleb. And ducked down to pull out the laser ball. Yes, that's right. I managed to find a large sphere that emits lasers in 360 motherfucking degrees after all this time. Considered a special project of mine. Absolutely glorious. I set it down, flipped it on, and admired as red laser beams shone every direction, creating the type of laser maze you see in spy movies. Caleb stopped attacking and began staggering, trying to escape the lasers all around us, and then they were easy to pick off with conventional weapons. Purple liquid sprayed across the marble as the lasers helped us bring them down. Rule number 2. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this was too easy. It wasn't. I got scratched and clawed plenty on my arms and legs, Zoe got bitten, all of us were sweating, skin peeling from the heat of the explosions and still smoking corpses. But we weren't doing half bad, if I do say so myself. Waffles was definitely an asset too. He was killing something at any given moment. The Dylans were still standing, ears covered. I've never found a way to kill them besides sunlight. But I could get sunlight. And they couldn't do anything while the recordings were playing the word blueberry repeatedly. I ran back over to the doors, which had swung shut again behind Waffles, and dragged them open. I leaned against one, holding it in place, and Mr. Bailey took the other, sitting down squarely with his back against the door. He looked at me, tail curled calmly around his legs, like he was just chillin' and not holding a door open to let sunlight in to kill monsters. And it was oddly comforting. Between that and the windows and the hole in the ceiling, sunlight filled the once shadowy lobby. The Dylans had nowhere to flee. Zoe and Tristan made sure of that. I watched in satisfaction as they collapsed into black sand, remembering the vial of black sand Zoe had left for me the first time I'd ever seen her. What fond memories, huh? One more type of monster down. There were a few Ashleys in the mix too, but they were easy to deal with. You refuse their food and they leave in a huff. Rule number 6. I don't actually know if they can be killed, but they follow their own rules, so why bother? They're not very convincing in a bank anyway. 1 or 2 offered me food in an outstretched hand, but I flipped them the bird both times, and they seemed to get the hint. I watched as they gave up and simply walked out of the bank, probably hoping to go find stupider victims elsewhere. If you've been keeping track, this left us with Sandra's, MJ's, and Mike's. Luckily, the 2 Mikes had been the last to leave the elevator, likely shoved in the back since they're so big. Or else we might have been dead already. Now they were a problem, though. One had its eyes fixed on me, and the other was zoning in on Tristan, and it wasn't like I could simply freeze since we were in the middle of fighting for our lives against the remaining monsters. The good news is, Mikes aren't picky. I ran into a cluster of MJs and ducked down so that I was hidden behind them. And like I'd been hoping, they paid no attention to the Mike, because they only cared about humans. They wanted me. As soon as it entered their crowd, all of them had turned to face me, forming a messy circle with me in the center. They all imitated people I knew. Justin, my parents, me, Nolan. They were crying, begging me to take their hands, or at least I assumed so. I couldn't actually hear their exact words through my headphones. But somehow, since reliving the entire story of seeing my parents die, they didn't seem so convincing anymore. It was easy to give them a good old-fashioned middle finger and passionately yell to them that I would never take your hands, you dumb fucks. Rule number 11. I didn't have to refuse them for long anyway. The mic was closing in, and those guys are fast. Like I'd counted on, and yes, it was a gamble, but a pretty good one in my opinion. They didn't differentiate between MJs and actual humans. As soon as the mic had reached the MJs between me and it, its mouth opened wider and wider, and it began to drag the first few MJs in. Obviously, this wouldn't kill them. I knew that. But while the mic was actively sucking MJs into the black hole, it wasn't advancing on me. It was focused on the devouring part. And that's all I needed, to shove the MJs aside, shooting a few in the head for good measure to get them out of the way, and run around to the side of the mic, pulling myself up onto its back. I realized this was a questionable strategy last time I did it, but it was my best bet to kill it from its blind spot to minimize the chance of it moving on from the MJs straight to me, rule number 3. And Zoe's axe wasn't a factor this go-round. I had a few long knives on my belt, not small ones for throwing, but long-bladed ones that looked like baby swords. This seemed like a fantastic time to use them. Screaming wordlessly, even though I could barely hear myself, I took one of those knives in each hand, dug my knees in for balance, and drove the knives deep into either side of its throat, so that both of them went straight through to the other side. The resulting look was not unlike the bolts on either side of Frankenstein's monster's neck. Yes, his monster. The monster is not Frankenstein. Read a book, guys. Seriously. Zoe would be ashamed if you didn't know that. The mic immediately began to stumble. This time I leapt off right away, hitting the marble floor hard, feet first, but then tumbling head over heels from the momentum of the jump. I definitely twisted my ankle. It hurt like hell. Hit my head too. I could feel the blood welling up above my left eye. But I sure wasn't making the mistake of staying on too long and almost getting sucked into the inverting black hole again. Luckily, the MJs nearby didn't know this. I watched from the floor as the black hole expanded, and then collapsed in on itself, taking the mic and a few unfortunate MJs within its range with it. A few MJs had been spit back out of the mic before its inversion, the ones it had just ingested seconds earlier, but no one else, which only proved the theory that we were being watched and that this elevator full of monsters had been freshly sent to stop us. That mic was probably brand new, hadn't even been out and about the city. Mr. Bailey and Waffles immediately closed in on those dazed MJs, making quick work of them by decimating their heads. A+ team. Slowly getting to my feet, I was a little dizzy. I thought I might have a slight concussion. I saw that Tristan was actually holding his own against the second mic. He had led it over to the columns and was pressed up against one, on the opposite side of the advancing mic. Must have gotten out of its sight by hiding behind the column. I continued to watch as Tristan crept around the column, coming behind the mic, and now he was in its actual blind spot, not like the incorrect blind spot the first time he met one. He had a spear he'd fashioned from a broom handle back at the bookstore, and he launched it javelin style, hitting the mic in the back of the head. The same black hole collapse I just witnessed occurred a second time. Tristan turned around, smiling. When he caught me looking, his smile returned to a death glare, TM. But it was too late. I'd seen him smile, and it was a real smile. Killing the type of monster that had gotten him the first time around had made him happy enough to let his guard down, at least for a split second. The monster numbers were dwindling quickly, and we were winning. I began to feel hopeful. It looked like we might actually make it out of here. But then two things happened at once. One, I saw movement to my left and looked out towards the open doors to see another horde of monsters charging across the plaza out front, beelining for the bank. And two, I realized I hadn't seen Zoe for several minutes. Frantically, I glanced to my right, and my heart seized. In the bank, we were down to Sandra's really, and that was it. They'd been singing the whole time, but thanks to our double hearing protection, the biggest result had been a constant dull headache. Until now. Apparently they'd gotten frustrated that their singing wasn't working, and had resorted to more direct means of attack. Two of them had tendrils of vines wrapped around Zoe's arms and legs, and were slowly pulling in opposite directions. Have you ever heard of quartering? The old medieval form of death where your limbs would be attached to objects moving in different directions, like, say, horses, so that as they moved apart, you'd literally be torn limb from limb? That's what these two Sanders are trying to do to Zoe. She was suspended in air, belly up, as one yanked on her left arm and leg and the other on her right side. She was screaming. I didn't need to hear to be able to read the terror on her face. That's the most fear I've felt since my family's deaths, I'll tell you that. Seeing Zoe like that, and knowing there was probably only a minute or so before she was torn apart, but also knowing there was another monster horde charging closer behind us, there was no way to win. Go close the doors and I'd lose Zoe. Save Zoe and we'd be overrun with the other monsters in seconds, and we didn't have enough weapons left to fight off a second army. We'd die anyway. It seemed hopeless, but suddenly Tristan appeared in front of me. He'd taken his headphones off, and he ripped mine off too. The whole world seemed to ring in my ears. "Go save her!" he shouted. "I've got the door!" I looked at him in shock. Was it a trick? Was he really helping save us? Did I have time to debate this? Before I could say anything, he literally shoved me towards Zoe, probably a bit more forcefully than he needed to, and again shouted, "Go, you idiot!" Then he put his headphones back on and was charging for the door, Mr. Bailey in hot pursuit to help him. I couldn't question it. I replaced my headphones too and looked around at all the bloody and smoldering monster corpses. I knew Sanders could be burned. There! One Brent was still on fire. Gagging at the smell, I quickly pulled out an extra shirt from my duffel nearby, held it in the flames until it caught fire, and ran over to the Sandra. It was still pulling at Zoe, and she looked at me, tears sparkling behind her glasses. Furious, I threw the flaming shirt over the Sandra's head. The vines wrapped around Zoe's left arm and leg immediately retracted as the Sandra shrieked, flailing at its face. Zoe tumbled to the floor, and now that one side was free, she was able to reach out and just barely grab her axe from where it had fallen. As the Sandra beside me burned up into dust and leaves, Zoe swung her axe one-handed at the vines around her other arm. They recoiled. She staggered to her feet and followed, hacking away at the Sandra as she got closer, still swinging with only her right arm. When it turned and tried to flee, Zoe dropped her axe, reached into her pocket, struck a match, and threw it at the Sandra. It hit square in the back of its neck. We both watched as it went up in flames. And that was it. All the monsters in the bank were gone. Still breathing shakily, I took my headphones off again. Zoe took hers off using her right hand, her left arm dangling at her side. I limped over to her, my ankle burning with pain. "Are you okay?" I asked. She looked like hell. I'm sure we both did. She gestured to her arm. "Can't move it. I think they dislocated my shoulder." Despite it all, I smiled at her. "It's 3-2 now," I said. "I've saved your life twice." She looked at me for a second, and then laughed out loud, bumping my shoulder with her good one. "I'll give you that one. Thank you." The words were there on my lips. I almost said them, almost said, "I love you." But our moment was broken up by Tristan skidding to a stop next to us. His headphones were off too, and he looked pissed. "Hate to ruin your reunion, but did you forget about the second monster horde outside?" he demanded, gesturing towards the doors that he'd relocked. Honestly, I had forgotten, in my panic to save Zoe. Oops. But now that I looked, I could see the doors visibly shaking, and I could hear the roars and screeches outside. "We have to take that elevator now," he said, "or they're coming in. And I didn't make it this far and save your sorry asses to die now." I mean, he was right. I took Zoe's good hand in my own and yelled for Waffles and Mr. Bailey to follow us. The elevator door had stayed open this whole time, thank God, though now the elevator was simply a large empty room with concrete walls. No monsters. Well, until we stepped inside. Then there was Waffles. Ha! Sorry, probably not funny. We fit easily, of course. Grabbed our bags from the floor and hustled in there together. The only problem was there were no buttons inside. It must be controlled externally, likely by whoever was running the show. And the door wasn't closing. Fuck, I cursed, desperately looking for anything to get us moving. The bank's front doors burst open at that moment. Caleb's, Brent's, the whole lot came exploding in, heading right for us. I turned to Zoe to try to tell her that I loved her, again. But right then, there was the faint sound of moving metal, and the elevator door quickly slid shut. We heard banging as the monsters fought to get in, but there was no getting past that heavy metal block. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then the concrete room shook, and with a tremble it began moving downwards. I looked around at all of us. We were in pretty rough shape. I was pretty sure I had a busted ankle and a mild concussion, not to mention the blood dripping down my face or coming from all the cuts on my body. Tristan had a black eye and a nasty-looking slash down his arm. Zoe had several bite marks and cuts, and of course the dislocated shoulder. And all of our faces were red and blistered. Waffles was torn up too, missing chunks of fur and claw marks raked across his chest. Mr. Bailey maybe fared the best, but even he had a nick in his ear, blood-streaked fur, and a paw that he was holding off the ground gingerly. But we were alive, and we were moving down in the elevator. Zoe's hand was in mine, and Mr. Bailey's fur brushed my leg. Hell, I was even happy to have Tristan here. Who knew what we'd be greeted by when it opened? Maybe another horde of monsters and we'd be dead within minutes. But I was proud of us anyway. I would have said that, but as we rode down in silence, I think we all knew. There was a kind of unspoken understanding between us. For once, it wasn't a hateful silence, but an amicable one. After several minutes, yes, several, the elevator ground to a halt. We looked at each other, and I took a deep breath. "Ready?" I said. Zoe and Tristan nodded. Waffles made his little agreement noise, and Mr. Bailey chirped. I gripped Zoe's hand tighter as the elevator door slid open. But we weren't ready, because whatever we were expecting to see, it wasn't what we saw. The door opened, revealing a long concrete hallway and a figure standing there in the middle of it, facing us, like he'd been awaiting our arrival. And Tristan and I spoke at the same time, for once on the same page, our voices radiating shock. "Nolan?"